I like GMT games in general, and I like Victory Point games in general, so to me is a match made in heaven when GMT republishes Victory Point games. We have the Fading Glory project coming out next year, when GMT is going to republish several games in the Napoleonic 20 series by Victory Point games. And along these lines, a game that just came out is No Retreat, The Russian Front, which is the GMT edition of Victory Point games No Retreat. Actually, this edition is not only a deluxe version with better components, but also includes several expansions of the original No Retreat game. The topic clearly is the Eastern Front in World War II at the strategic level, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, another one, another game where the Germans are gonna push a little, winter becomes a problem, the Russians push back, and the Germans retreat. What else is new? A lot. A lot of things are new in this game. New concepts, new takes on well-known ideas, and I would say more than anything else, execution. It is like listening to a well-known, familiar musical score that suddenly is being played at a level of competence and creativity that you did not think was possible anymore, and you are wow. You are wow all the time. This game is that good. Yes. This is the map for the game. It is a large mounted map. I think it is a beauty. It is simple, yes, but also very clean, very elegant. I like the colors. I like the simple graphics, the design of the terrain. It is also very functional, so it is just a pleasure to play with, and definitely everything in this map has been designed to make gameplay more accessible. Also, you have all the charts and tables that you need to play the game around the map itself, very convenient. Victory in this game can be achieved in several ways, which is great because that means that players have a lot of flexibility in the way in which they create their strategies, and they may even switch strategy throughout the game, trying to meet a certain type of victory condition now and another one later. One way to win the game is by objective victory, that is, by taking control of a certain number of enemy objectives. The German player, for example, wins the game if he takes control of a certain number of the following objectives: Sevastopol, the oil fields, Stalingrad, Moscow, and Leningrad. And the number of these objectives that the German player needs to control changes depending on the phase in which the game is. The Russian player wins the game if he controls 3 of the following: Königsberg, Vienna, Prague, or Berlin. And if the Russian player eliminates the Berlin garrison, he also wins the game because, well, he just killed Hitler, which is, quite something. Another way to win the game is by victory points. Victory points are gained by controlling enemy cities, by forcing enemy units to surrender, and by events generated by the cards. This is not a card-driven game, it is a card-enhanced game in which the cards have a very important role. Both players will draw from the same deck. At the beginning of one's turn, the active player will discard down to 2 cards and then will draw 4 new cards. There are situations in which the number may be different, but this is the general idea. So usually it's not that important to save cards from turn to turn, because in any case at the beginning you have to discard down to 2. These cards are divided in 2 sections, a German section and a Russian section, and each section represents the benefit, the action that that player will be able to execute, the benefit that the player will receive by playing the card and executing what the text says. Now, a game is divided in 2 phases, a German initiative phase and a Russian initiative phase. These symbols here, restrictions that indicate when that effect can be played. For example, the German player will be able to play this card for its effect only during the German initiative phase of the game. The Russian player in this case would be able to play this card for its effect only during the Russian phase of the game, things like that. But however, do not worry if you cannot use a card for its effect because it is not the right initiative phase, or you simply do not need that effect at that time. There are just so many other things that you can do by using these cards by discarding them, by burning them, ignoring the effect, just as sort of like generic, but I should say flexible resources. By spending cards from your hand, you can receive replacements, you can refit your units, you can reorganize units that were disorganized, you can receive extra railroad movement, you can force your opponent to launch attacks against your units, which may be desirable at times when the opponent is launching a very concentrated attack against one of your units, and then you want that attack to be dispersed and to target several units so that the attack is less devastating. After the card phase of the active player, then both players check for supply status. In order to be in supply, a unit must be able to trace a path of no more than 4 axes to a supply source. Supply sources are the friendly edge of the map and cities that are controlled by the player and that themselves can trace a supply path to the friendly edge of the map. The path of supply must be free of enemy units and of enemy zones of control. Most units project a zone of control in the 6 axes around them. But for the purpose of tracing supply lines, friendly units do negate enemy zones of control. If a unit is found to be out of supply at the beginning of a turn, it receives an out of supply marker. It has several penalties, but it can still attack normally, so it can still try to get out of its predicament, which is very important because if a unit is found to be out of supply at the beginning and still at the end of a turn, not only is that unit eliminated, but it actually surrenders and gives a victory point to the opponent. Then you have the organization phase of the active player, during which reinforcements are brought to the map, and then by spending resources, that is by spending cards, the active player can refit units that have been flipped to the reduced side, and they can be flipped to their full side. Also, units that have been destroyed can be brought back to the map by spending cards, but they're brought back to the map with a disorganization marker on them. That marker can be removed for free later, but as long as it stays there, that unit cannot attack. So during this phase, the player can also spend an extra card to remove that marker and make the return the unit combat effective immediately. During the Russian organization phase, the Russian player can also improve his units. All Russian units start the game with their brown side up. They also have a red better side, but at the beginning of the game that side is ignored. You have to consider these units as one-step units. They take a hit, they are removed from the game, and even if you spend resources, you cannot make them better than they are at this time. However, later in the game, you will be able, as Russian player, to start improving your units at the rate of 1 at a time and to flip them to their red side. Earlier, after this process starts, these are still one-step units. They're stronger, but still brittle. If they take a hit, they're removed from the map. However, then later in the game, these units are not only flip to the red side, but also they become two-step units. So when they take a hit, they reduce to their brown side, and the Russian player can spend resources to flip them back to their full side. Next, the active player executes movement by moving any and all of his units up to the movement allowance, which is the number printed there at the bottom right corner of the counter. Units can move up to the movement allowance, but taking into account several factors such as terrain, whose effect is detailed here on this chart, and weather. Weather will change throughout the game. Weather can be clear, in which case there are no modifications, but you may also have mud weather, snow weather, or long winter weather. And different turns, according to the time of the year in which the turn takes place, will have different weather. Also, there may be card effects that will modify the weather, and weather will have a huge impact not only on movement, as detailed in this column, but also many other factors, such as armor effectiveness, defense shifts, and advance after combat. So you really have to factor weather in a variety of ways if you want to play the game effectively. And during the movement phase, units also have to stop as soon as they enter an enemy zone of control. As soon as the active player has completed all movement, then combat follows. Combat is between adjacent units. At the beginning of the combat phase, the active player will place target markers on the axis that he intends to attack. Each player has a certain number of attack markers, target markers. So for example, suppose it is the German combat phase and the German player wants to attack those two axes, then he places those two targets there. Later in the turn, combat will be resolved by adding together the combat strength of the attackers, computing the odds against the combat strength of the defender, modifying the odds based on several factors such as weather, terrain, and card effects, and then once you have the final combat odds, you roll on a table and you see what the result of that attack is. However, there is an absolutely interesting twist to this well-known combat system, and the twist comes from the counter blow idea. The target markers of the players also have another side that indicates that those markers can be used as counter blows. During the phase in which the active player is declaring attacks, right after the active player has placed his target markers, but before the attacks are resolved, the non-active player, the player that is being attacked, can spend cards to place counter blow markers on his own units. And those counter blow markers represent hexes that now the active player has to attack. Basically, what these counter blows represent are partial advances, partial attacks against the active player as the active player is launching his main concentrated attacks in an attempt to divert forces, to divert strength from the pre-planned attacks. So what you have here in the end is a very simple core of rules: cards, supply, move, attack, repeat, but also a lot of historical factors that are woven into the story and that you have to take into account turn after turn as you're playing. The changing weather is a huge factor. The historical events determined by the turn track, like El Alamein or D-Day, they happen somewhere else, but they have an effect on the board. The reinforcements will, of course, bring in different waves of units, but also units with different abilities from the units that you have at the beginning. The Russian army that becomes stronger and stronger. There are just so many factors that enter the general simple grid of rules that really enrich the historical experience. At the first sight, the game that this game made me think of was Case Yellow 1940, where you also have simple rules and then yet a lot of historical detail, but then the final result in the two games is completely different. Case Yellow 1940 feels much like a solitary historical study on that situation, because you feel that all the historical factors are a little restrictive, you feel constricted by them. And here, this is a game that definitely remains and shines as a game. It is incredibly playable, fun to play, and yet at the same time you feel that all of the historical elements really enter your strategy. You don't feel that you really had to stretch your strategy to make it, meet the requirements. You just feel that you have to deal with the historical elements. You can take advantage of some of those. They become part of your strategy. You feel that you're playing the game just like you want to play it, the way it makes sense to you to play it, and then almost preternaturally you see actually the events of the Russian campaign just developing in front of you. It is a miraculous sense of history that comes from an equally miraculously free sense of gameplay and just having fun, and I want to see what I can do. Overall, this is a fantastic game. The components are great, the rules are great, and it is a game that may work perfectly as someone's first X Encounter game ever, and I can see seasoned gamers savoring this game for a long time, trying different strategies, because every time really this game is revealing different layers of depth to me. Some periods in our life are just lucky. Recently I played Field Commander Napoleon, which is to me the best solitaire game of 2011, and then right after I play a true player game that is simply superior. This is a superior game that I could not recommend enough to you.